Hello YouTube, my name is Zach, and today I'm going to be analyzing Matt Barlow of Iced Earth. Now, I am analyzing Matt Barlow by request of BT, who won our Guess the Analysis competition that I held a few videos ago. And for those of you who don't know what that is, I'm very close to 1,000 subscribers. Yes! And so as a result, I'm going to be doing a 3-part Mike Patton analysis for all of you, since he's been so heavily requested, and since so many of you want to understand, you know, kind of how he does things. And well, I can't wait to kind of delve into it too, because it's pretty wild. Anyway, BT won. He had a couple of people potentially in mind, but what actually ended up happening is he deferred to my Discord server and the people that are in the server, and they all kind of came together and decided that Matt Barlow should be the next choice. If you want to get in on discussions like that, please join my Discord channel. There's a lot of people in there. We're having some great chats. It's a really good place for you to talk with me and ask me questions and whatnot, and it's just been a really good environment. Everyone in there is really cool. So I'll put the link in the description, so please feel free to join. I would love to see you there and get to know you a bit. At any rate, so I don't know a lot about Matt Barlow. I've listened to a little bit of Iced Earth. A guitarist friend of mine from high school was a big fan of John Schaefer, and so I heard a good bit of his guitar playing through that. The dude's an incredible rhythm guitarist. Like, how does he palm mute like that? Dude's insane. Anyway, that's the extent that I was familiar with Matt Barlow. I don't know a whole lot about his singing background, anything like that, so I'm going to be shooting from the hip with regards to my understanding of his singing. I've listened through this video a couple of times to get kind of an idea of what to expect, and I have a lot to say that I think will interest some of you a good deal. This is Melancholy, and apparently this is one of their better known songs. I wouldn't know, but for those of you who've never seen my videos before, this is an objective vocal analysis. I'm going to be taking the ideas that I've learned throughout my years as a voice teacher and throughout my years of voice study to give an overarching, comprehensive perspective on his singing voice as a whole. It will include the good, it will include the bad. All of my analyses are based upon the principles of health and academia first. I try to take out my personal biases and opinions as much as I can. So please listen to the analysis from that perspective, and don't think that I'm trying to treat this as if I'm a better singer than Matt Barlow or anything. This is simply what I would say to Matt Barlow if he came into my vocal studio and wanted voice lessons. I'd give him these perspectives and insights and tips. At any rate, let's get started. This is Melancholy. Here we go.
The sadness gone.
Okay, so the very first thing that I want to point out is a concept that I've touched on briefly in prior videos, but I haven't really expanded on it very much. We're going to talk a little bit about placement today. And in this particular example, Matt Barlow is a very unique singer compared to a lot of other like frontmen and like popular singers that I run into. Most singers that I run into place their sound too far forward in their mouths, and so you get a really bright, shiny sort of sound, but it lacks depth and richness, and it lacks that kind of fullness. So Matt Barlow, from what it seems up to this point, is the opposite. His sound is very far back. He places the sound way back in his mouth. So a very simple example would be, if I made sound like this, that's very frontal. I'm making the sound up in the front of my lips, in my nose, that kind of thing. All the resonance is stuffed way up here. But if I go like this, you can hear this deeper, thicker sound. Well, there my sound is too far back. So if you listen to him sing, what you hear is sort of this quality like this. It sounds like that, and that kind of sound is a byproduct of resonance being placed far back in the mouth, far back in the throat. Now, there is a concept that singers have striven for centuries, and we call it chiaroscuro. Chiaroscuro, and it is an Italian term, obviously, that originated in visual art, and I'm not huge into visual art. I don't know a ton about it, but I do know that it has to do with the comparison of lighting. And the term chiaroscuro translates to light and dark. So when you talk about chiaroscuro in context of a singing setting, what you actually are talking about is the combination of frontal, bright, ringy resonance with the dark back of mouth low larynx, raised, soft palate resonance sound. So when you combine the two, you get the light dark, the chiaro scuro. And in this case, Matt Barlow seems like he has too much scuro and not enough chiaro. And so a lot of times, like I think back on someone like Haley Williams, who I analyzed, or if I think back on Bruce Dickinson, or if I think back on John Arch, those guys were very frontal, very chiaro heavy, very bright. So when you compare the sounds of the voices, you can definitely hear that there is a ringiness, a shininess to the bright, but there is this robustness and full sound from the dark, or the scuro. And so ideally you want to combine the two so that you get that bright, ringy sound that resonates and cuts and is easy to it sort of shines and shimmers, but you also want to give it that richness so that it carries and that it has a fullness and a big sound and a it gives you that power. So and I'm kind of oversimplifying it a little bit here, but the general idea is that when you combine the two, you get a really nice balanced sense of resonance. And in this case, resonance is a little too far back. Anyway, let's keep going.
For years I've tried to teach, but the eyes that you do.
One thing I can definitely point out about him, and I kind of want to preface a little bit by saying this, I'm jumping into these deep, kind of complex subjects so quickly because he's clearly a more advanced singer, and I don't feel like I need to talk about his breath support. I don't need to talk about, like, his vowels and things like that, because he's already got enough going on vocally that I know is sort of technically proficient to where I don't have to go into that really basic stuff. So if you're kind of watching these videos for a more like simplistic approach, this one might be a little more complicated, might be a little bit more in depth, just because it's kind of like the Messiah Marcolin video was. He's a little bit more of a polished singer in terms of technique, so I can go into these things. But I stopped here to point out that his embouchures are generally excellent. You look at his vowel shapes when he sings these words, he never spreads out wide. He keeps everything nice and small in his embouchure. Everything's kind of inside the goalposts. So like one of the kind of hallmarks of embouchure usage is like if you make a field goal, like football, field goal post on your lips like this, and if your mouth goes outside of it like that, your embouchures are typically too wide. And in this case, they're not. They're like lined up right within the goalpost. So his embouchures are quite good. So I just wanted to make that observation before we move on. So he's doing these scoops up to the beginning of the words. And by scooping, I mean like glissando, sliding up. But he's combining it with a fry register sound, which is interesting. I can't tell if he's actually phonating on the fry or not, but we actually had a discussion about this in the Discord server yesterday, I think it was, about how frying in and of itself, making that sound is okay, as long as you don't voice on it. So if you try to make a voice sound along with the fry, it typically ends up being destructive. The fry is essentially just a vocal fold sort of like flopping back and forth freely, but they don't have the responsibility of carrying like a vibratory function through it. So when you create the vibration and the folds are fully closed, that's completely healthy. But if you're doing something that causes the folds to flop back and forth and not fully close, but you're trying to vibrate anyway, then that tends to create a very uneven, unbalanced amount of work and distribution across the folds, which can lead to damage. And so, one of the big questions I always get is, how do you make raspy sounds and sing at the same time? And the truth is that, as far as we know, you can't do it healthily. I mean, you can make the sound all you want, but I don't know of any way to do it healthily. So if you want to make rasp, one of the ways to do it would be to fry and vocalize at the same time. I'm not recommending that to anyone, because as a voice teacher, I feel like I have the responsibility and the kind of the ethical onus on myself to make sure that I do no harm, or teach things that I know are sustainable. So I'm not recommending that you do that, but if that's the kind of sound you want to create, that voiced raspy sound, fry and vocalize at the same time. That's how you would create the sound. Know at the same time that it is destructive to your voice. On the contrary, if you just fry the sound, then doing so is not destructive. If you just go that's not vocally destructive at all. You're not going to hurt anything doing that. I wouldn't do it for 2 hours straight, just like I wouldn't do any vocalization for 2 hours straight. But you're not going to really hurt yourself doing that. In this case, what it sounds like Matt Barlow is doing is he fries up in the glissando, and then as the vocalization comes in, he takes the fry off and he goes to his singing voice. And if that's the case, then I mean, it sounds like that's totally fine to me. I don't see the destructive nature in that. I mean, I could be wrong on this since I don't really do a lot of study into raspy singing, but just from what I know about frying and the way that he's frying and then sort of dropping off the fry and moving into the modal register, it sounds like that should be pretty healthy. So that rasp really sounds like the placement was very far back. So it sounded like things were very much back here, and then he put the rasp on top of it. I honestly don't know if placement affects the way that the rasp functions on the voice. Generally speaking, from everything I've ever learned, rasp is just bad when you vocalize with it, period. So unhealthy bad. I don't mean like sounds bad, but I would venture to say that it probably doesn't make a huge difference of where you place the sound when you make the rasp. I think the frontal placement, back placement in general is probably equally destructive. That's kind of speculative by me, but I think that that's probably a safe thing to assume. Okay, so here on this little phrase, one thing that I find interesting is when he went, in their eyes, or however, I don't know the song, I'm just kind of singing back, but the eyes, in their eyes part, it sounded like it was brighter. It sounded more frontal, but in the same time, he kind of pulled the dark sound out. It still doesn't have that chiaroscuro thing. It's much more frontal. It sounds like the larynx is higher up than when he does the like back of mouth, like darker sounding stuff. So I would be interested in hearing his sound if he combines the two. And I don't recall in this video if he ever does it or not, but if he does, I'll point it out. There is a concept that we call voce di strega, which is pretty much translated to witch's voice, that we do with some singers to help them brighten their tone. And it consists of some really ugly, nasty vocalese, like making like yeah, like stuff like that. That's like, it just sounds awful. But the point of it is to give your body, give your face, give your mouth, give your voice as a whole the feeling of placing resonance up in the front. So like what we'll do is if someone has this really deep thing, we'll have them do the voce di strega exercises to get them to feel the frontal, and eventually we'll be able to combine the two. A very common thing that we'll run into with singers that are too dark is that they will make an overly bright tone. And so I wonder if Matt Barlow has ever done any of these kinds of exercises, and as a result, instead of combining the dark and the light, he's kind of just got dark mode and he's got light mode. I'm going to keep listening, but there's definitely a different timbre here that's much on the more frontal, brighter side on this particular section. So when he sung devoid, that was a more closed vowel. Like it almost sounded like an oo. So it sounded like he was using a vowel modification there instead of going oh. And so we have this weird thing there on the word devoid. Oi. You have this diphthong, oi, devoid. So how do you sing that? So what he did is he made a really nice singing choice, and he turned it into an oo, devoid. He kind of did this kind of thing. And it's a nice vowel modification because it fits right into that like passaggio point, and it's a higher note in the phrase. So I would say that he navigated that very, very well. And in this case, the dark kind of helped, since the oo is a more closed vowel. Having that open space in the back and moving to the closed embouchure helped him create what we call the vocal hook, or the hook is kind of like the heavier mix that comes in when you're trying to move up through the passaggio with a bigger sound. So he had a really nice vocal hook there. And so as a result, the whole phrase sounded very even. I have so much to say about this guy. I feel like I'm just throwing a ton of information out, but it's hard to condense it all because there's so much to say about his singing. I mean, I haven't even gotten to his phrasing and his breath support, which we will get to in a minute. Okay, so here was a really good example. Let me rewind it a second. Yeah, so this is a really good shot. You can definitely see the forehead tension. And so he's got some tension in his face, and that's corroborated by the way that he sings the word me in a second. I'm going to start it again. I want you to listen to this eval. Yeah, so you hear that kind of thing, right? So whenever you hear an eval that has like a kind of sound to it, that's a byproduct of jaw tension. So it sounds like when he approaches certain vowels, he tenses up too much. And so the eval is a bright vowel. And if he's coordinated his voice to use a lot darker, more back placement type sounds, it makes sense that he would have an issue with properly coordinating a brighter vowel since he's not used to the type of resonance that bright vowels create. So if you go E and you tighten your jaw, you actually feel the E sound more in the back of the mouth. Whereas if you go E, and you put your tongue in the right place, like you put your tongue at the back of your bottom teeth and you arch the tongue in the middle of the mouth, you feel a brighter E, you feel the resonance on the tip of your tongue. But when you go E, you feel it all in your jaw and the bottom of your mouth and the back of your mouth. So it sounds to me like what he's doing is, since he hasn't effectively coordinated some of these brighter vowels as much, and since he leans so much on that like scuro type sound, that he's using tension to hold that back placement to sing all of his vowels when he doesn't need to. This is another example where the concept of chiaro scuro is really important because you can navigate the brighter vowels and the darker vowels with equal efficacy. And in this case, the byproduct, the result of him not being able to do the brighter vowels as efficiently is facial tension and tension in the jaw.
This is what I cry for. Look at the pain around me.
Yeah, again, he did the same thing on the eval, so that's 2 for 2. Since he approached that eval the same way in both iterations, it makes me think that that's just the way that he's taught himself to navigate these, brighter sounding vowels.
This is what I've done for.
Okay, so this is unfortunate that the video quality isn't super clear. But if you look, when he sung the word for, you could see his head shake a little bit. And so let me see if I can play it back so you can see that. Very subtle. Let me do it one more time. Yeah, it's hard to make out, but he definitely does this thing a little bit. And there's a few things going on here. First off, he's holding one of his ears, which means that he's probably having trouble hearing, which means that his conception of the pitch is probably a little skewed. He wasn't off pitch in any of this, but if anything, he was sharp, especially on that note that he did that like shaky vibrato on. One thing that I remember from college is one of my professors who wasn't my main voice teacher, she was another professor in the faculty. She always would say that if you're flat, it's probably either not knowing the pitch you're supposed to sing or it's bad breath support. If you're sharp, you're either pushing too hard or you're thinking too much. And so since we've already established that he's using a lot of tension in this area where he has to sing brighter and he can't hear, well, he's probably thinking really hard about the note that he's trying to sing, and he's probably pushing harder than he needs to on some of these brighter vowels, these brighter sections. So his pitch navigates a little bit sharp. It's not a lot, but it's just like that much, just to where you can hear it going a little sharp. Sharp is a lot less common than flat singing. You hear people sing flat a lot more frequently in a lot more different scenarios than people singing sharp. Now, the head shake thing is him trying to manufacture a vibrato sound. And as I mentioned before, if you've ever seen any of my talks about vibrato comes from an oscillation on the folds when they're fully closed and the voice is open and everything's relaxed. So if there's so much tension going on in his singing all at once, he's not going to get that natural vibrato. So shaking your head makes a shaky sort of vibrato sound. And so I'm sure that he knows that he wants to put a vibrato there, but all the tension is preventing it from happening naturally, so he shakes his head to kind of manufacture it a bit. One thing to point out, though, and I kind of mentioned this briefly before, is he has excellent sense of line. And what I mean by that is he carries one breath all the way through phrases. He doesn't breathe until the phrase is over with. Once you get to a certain level of singing and you've got some of the fundamentals down, some of the technique down, you start talking about concept of legato. And I've been, very in depth about this in the past, how legato is like that connectedness of your phrases and connecting your vowels together. And ultimately that's judged by how well you can carry a line of sound from the beginning of a phrase to the end of a phrase. And one thing to point out about his singing as a whole is that he does a very, very good job of carrying a line from the beginning to the end. Even when he takes little pauses in his singing, you still hear the sense of connectedness throughout the phrase. You never feel like the phrase is like disjointed or broken up. That's a sign of very good legato, very good line, and it's something that he's clearly worked on to some extent. And the fact that he can hold through entire, 4, 6, 8 bar phrases without breathing shows that he's got solid support underneath him. So let's continue this little section, and I think there are a few more examples of this that I can point out as well.
Still, you push me to see something I can never be.
Yeah, so this whole little part right here, I know it got really blurry, so I couldn't show it all in the way that I wanted. But in that little section right there, the whole thing was carried through in one phrase. He took a breath, probably 5 or 6 seconds ago, and he carried the entire phrase all the way through. Even though it was low down, he was being a little quieter. His breath to voice ratio, he had a little bit more air on the sound. He still carried the phrase all the way through, and that's a good sign of artistry. It shows vocal consistency, which is something that's really nice. Again, he's still got the too dark. He's still like too far back with this kind of thing, like it's like spooky Halloween singing or something. Like that's kind of the vibe that sort of singing gives off, is like a ghost sort of. And maybe that's what he's going for. I haven't heard enough of his singing to know across the board if that's a consistent thing. If it's not a conscious choice, he's definitely like habitually singing with too much back of mouth resonance.
The shattered king. I don't mean anything.
See, I wouldn't even call that rasp there even singing a pitch. It almost sounded like he was just making a raspy vocalization of some kind without a specific pitch on it. So I don't really know in this case if that was him trying to vocalize and sing it at the same time. It's hard to tell. One thing that I do note about this particular song anyway is that when he does the raspy stuff, it's very brief. It's only for a few words, and it's kind of like a climactic thing. He doesn't use the rasp outside of like an apex of a line or something transitory leading into another section of the song. So maybe he just measures it out. Maybe he just knows a way to measure out the rasp stuff to where it doesn't affect his performance. Because I would say that from this up to this point in the song, him doing the raspy stuff hasn't had any kind of byproduct on what he does after it. So maybe he's found some way to make it work for him.
See the sadness in their eyes.
Yeah, so there he only took a breath at like the last 3/4 of the phrase. He held that all the way through from the beginning, and it's very good. His posture got a little bit slack there. He kind of leaned his head down, did that sort of thing, and that can have a negative impact on the coordination, the alignment, but it wasn't for very long, and he generally did a pretty good job of navigating it. Yeah, so the devoid vowel was the same thing. He did that same modification, so that's clearly a conscious choice that he's making. Good on him. It's really good stuff. Learning to navigate those vowels and those modifications in that higher range, or the like mid to high range, is really, really good. The mid to high modal range, I should say anyway. That's really nice. And notice that when he does void, it's got a really spinny kind of ringy vibrato, and it's because he's properly modifying the vowels, and it sounds like things are more free, and it just sort of opens up and the vibrato happens. That's not fake. So maybe that's a good demonstration for some of you who are wondering about the whole vibrato thing. Like when you have the good vowel modification, when you have the healthy process, the vibrato happens on its own. You don't have to force it. I mean, there are some singers who just don't have any vibrato. There are a few, but for the most part, most people can develop vibrato if they just get a good, open, free, healthy singing sound.
This is what I cry for. Look at the pain around me.
Yeah, you can even see his jaw like tensing up at the bottom. So yeah, that E vowel is definitely a byproduct of tension. I'm convinced that he just hasn't had enough work on bright vowels. And if he had some bright vowel work, he'd have just this really super resonant and balanced sound. He's a great singer. I mean, there's no question. I would venture to guess that he's had some training based upon what I'm hearing. Because some of these habits that he's demonstrated are just they're just good. They're just things that are fundamentally sound. And, every singer has their little blips on the radar every now and then. For the most part, this performance has been pretty consistent. Yeah, I mean, he's really consistent. That's the best way that I can explain it. I keep using like same terminology, but he's super consistent. He sung all these choruses almost identically in his approach. So he has learned behaviors, muscle memory type things that he's doing that are clearly indicative of him having an understanding of the way his voice works. Very rarely do you find an untrained singer that can sing 3 choruses almost the exact same way in terms of the vowel modifications they use, the phrasing, the times that they breathe, that kind of stuff. That shows that he's rehearsed and that he's had either someone give him pointers on the process of singing these things, or he knows some of the things that you need to look out for in the process of singing. It's extremely consistent, and it's a good model for people to look at if you're going to try to sing things on your own. A consistent approach works wonders for your singing, and he's clearly done a good job of that. I don't know what kind of like vocal issues he's had more recently. Maybe you guys can fill me in, but up to this point, he sounds really consistent, and so much to say that he's one of the most consistent singers I've analyzed up to this point. Okay, so there, when he jumped up to the higher iteration, we'd call this like the A prime in classical singing. Like when you have like the main thing and then you go back to it and change the melody, we call that A prime. In the A prime here, when he jumped up the pitches, made it higher, he actually lost some of that legato and he kind of went back into the tension sort of thing, and you could even see his mouth kind of do this thing. So maybe he defers to brighter vowels with jaw tension no matter where he's at in the range. But the thing is, when he did the rounded O, when he turned it to like the for that vowel modification was excellent. So more than anything, I just hear like, if I sat down with him and worked with him on some vocal stuff, the biggest things that I would have him do is just work on his modifications across the board, and I'd brighten up his tone. Other than that, I think he's fine. If he could find a way to balance out those bright vowels, the E's and the is and stuff like that, he'd be totally like an absolutely exceptional singer, I believe. I think that he would really have things going in his favor. Everything else about it sounds really good. As far as unhealthy habits goes, the only things that are like destructive in the long term are maybe the rasp stuff that he does, maybe the jaw tension if he does too much of it. In a small sample size, it's hard to know exactly how much he uses, but the fact that 80 to 85% of the song was relatively tension free, I would say is a pretty good sign that he doesn't have a lot of tension. Yeah, so that vibrato sounded very constricted, and it probably has to do with the fact he was putting that rasp on it. Since the rasp causes the folds to, as I mentioned before, sort of like flop back and forth, you're not going to get that relaxed, sort of like even closedness of it. So having a vibrato alongside that rasp is usually a byproduct of it being manufactured or forced. And so I think that, maybe if he sung the note without rasp, he would have had a better chance of doing vibrato. I don't know the words, but it sounded like the modifications there were sort of counterintuitive or counterproductive. Maybe the modifications were a little bit too wide or too open. It's hard to tell for sure since I don't know the words to the song, though. But it sounded like those vowels were a little bit too wide. And that's it. I went through the rest of the video and there was no more singing. It was just a little quick end of the chorus and an instrumental. So that's it for Matt Barlow. Across the board, I would say that he is very proficient vocally, as is anyone who does singing. There are technical deficiencies that he has that I don't think damage his voice, but I think that they limit him from being the singer that he could be. He could be even more dynamic and have even more vocal colors and even more pleasant sounds that he could create. I know that in metal, pleasant is kind of like one of those, like, you're not trying to be pleasant, you're trying to be metal, right? So I get that. But I think that his sound could be even more impressive and dynamic and diverse if he worked on some of these brighter vowels and brighter tones. I'd be interested in hear some of his more recent work to see how his voice has adapted or changed. But generally, he's very good. His onsets were generally very good. I didn't hear a lot of the glottal stuff. His legato was generally excellent, except for a few spotty places. His breath support was generally very good. His breath to voice ratio was generally very good, except for the times where he clearly was deliberately pulling a little bit of voice off of it. Great stuff. He's a good singer. He's definitely someone that I would say that if you're going to be a metal singer, following his guidelines of vowel modification and things like that are probably pretty safe. If you're looking for like sustainable, a sustainable approach, that kind of thing is probably okay. I don't know about the rasp. You guys know I don't really delve into that, so I can't make a comment here or there. All I can do is sort of tell you what I'm hearing. But yeah, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I am, as I said at the beginning of the video, I am so close to 1,000 subscribers. Like, I can just feel it coming. You guys have just blown me away with your support and your enthusiasm for this channel, and I thank you so much for it. It's sappy stories aside, this channel has kind of given my life sort of a different direction, and it's incredible. And I thank all of you for everything that you've done to support me and to encourage me, and those of you who've stood up for me in face of the criticisms that I've gotten, and so thank you. And I hope to continue to be a good, productive YouTuber for all of you, and you can learn more from me. So anyway, I'll talk more about that once I hit 1,000. But thank you so much. I do have a Patreon. If you're wanting to request a video, I have a tier for Patreon requests, and it doesn't have to be a specific singer. It can be on any singing subject that you want, as long as it's not like death metal gutturals and like rap and stuff like that. Those are things that I can't really give much like singing insight on, but yeah, it can be on any subject that you want. I do offer voice lessons. I will leave my email in the comments and in the description, so you guys can get in touch with me. I'll give you the link to my Discord server as well. And that's pretty much it. Feel free to follow me on Instagram. I'll put my Instagram in the description in the comments. Reach out to me if you have any questions. I'd love to have a chat with you all in the comments or in Discord or whatever. And I hope to see you guys soon with 1,000 subs, so I can start on Mike Patton videos, and that's going to be a lot of fun too. So thanks a lot, guys. You all take care. I'll see you next week. Bye.